October 1945, the cold, black waters of the Atlantic Ocean. A 22-year-old German woman sank beneath the waves, her lungs filling with freezing water. "I can't breathe," she screamed before going under again. Her heavy uniform dragged her down. Death was seconds away. The Americans on the ship above could have watched her drown. After all, she was the enemy, a Nazi. Her country had started the war that killed millions of their brothers. She had been told they were savages who showed no mercy to prisoners. She expected them to laugh, to turn away, to let the ocean finish what the war had started. But then something impossible happened. A soldier jumped in after her, not to finish her, to save her. An American risked his own life in freezing water to rescue a German prisoner of war. And that was just the beginning. What happened next on American soil, behind the wire of a prison camp, would shatter everything she thought she knew about enemies, about her country, and about the war itself. This is the true story of Greta Weber. And if it moves you, if you want to hear more untold stories like this from World War II, please hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like. These moments deserve to be remembered, and your support helps us keep telling them. Now let me take you back to where it all began, in the dark hold of a ship crossing the Atlantic, where 200 German women waited in fear for what the enemy would do to them. The transport ship cut through the grey Atlantic waters like a knife through cold butter. October winds screamed across the deck, sharp and bitter. The air tasted of salt and engine fuel. Below deck, in a cargo hold turned into a floating prison, 200 German women waited for whatever came next. They were prisoners of war, not soldiers who had fired guns, but women who had served the Nazi machine in other ways. Radio operators, clerks, secretaries, the invisible workers who had kept the war running from behind desks and switchboards. Now the war was over, and they were being shipped to America, the land of their enemies. Greta Weber sat on the edge of a metal bunk, her fingers tracing the cold frame. She was 22 years old. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight. Her eyes looked older than her years. For 3 years, she had worked as a radio operator for the Luftwaffe, Germany's air force. She had sent messages she never questioned. She had believed in her country with all her heart. Now that country lay in ruins, and she was crossing an ocean to face judgment from strangers. The hold smelled terrible. 200 bodies packed together, many of them seasick. Vomit, sweat, fear. The buckets placed around the room did little to help. The ship rocked and groaned, and stomachs lurched with every wave. "What do you think they will do to us?" asked Hannah, a young woman from Hamburg. She sat on the bunk below Greta, her knees pulled to her chest like a scared child. She was only 20, with a round face that still showed baby fat despite months of hunger. Greta did not answer right away. What could she say? They had all heard the stories. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as brutal savages, monsters without honor. The women had been told to expect torture, humiliation, starvation. Some whispered about things even worse, fears too dark to speak out loud. "I don't know," Greta finally said, "but we will find out soon enough." Around them, other women dealt with their fear in different ways. Some held rosaries, their lips moving in silent prayer. Others stared at the rusted ceiling with empty eyes, hope already dead inside them. A few kept their jaws tight and their backs straight, refusing to show weakness even as terror twisted in their stomachs. The strange thing was, so far, nothing matched the warnings. The train ride to the port had been calm. No beatings, no screaming guards, just paperwork, numbers, and tired soldiers who seemed bored rather than cruel. American guards came down to check on them twice a day. They brought bread and thin soup. They counted heads and left. Their faces showed neither kindness nor hatred, just the blank look of men doing a job. One woman, a former secretary from Berlin named Elsa, later wrote in her diary, "We expected demons, we found clerks. It was almost more frightening, not knowing what was real anymore. This confusion hung heavy in the air. Everything they had been taught said the Americans were monsters. But the monsters gave them food. The monsters let them use the bathroom. The monsters did not beat them or spit on them or mock them. It made no sense. As the ship pushed westward, the women had too much time to think. They thought about the homes they had left behind, many of them now rubble. They thought about families they might never see again. They thought about the future, which stretched before them like the endless grey ocean outside, unknown, cold, and possibly deadly. Greta lay awake that night, listening to the engines rumble and the hull creak. Somewhere above her, American sailors walked the deck. American soldiers smoked cigarettes and talked in a language she did not understand. She was completely in their power. Her life depended on their choices, and she had no idea what those choices would be. But in just a few days, the ocean itself would force an answer, and it would come in a way none of them could have imagined. The nausea became too much on the 5th day. Greta needed air. She needed to see the sky, even if it was grey and angry with coming rain. She climbed the narrow metal stairs to the deck. A guard at the top nodded, giving silent permission. His face showed nothing, no warmth, no hostility, just a man letting a prisoner breathe. She stepped outside and gasped. The wind hit her face like a slap, but it was clean, fresh. After days in that stinking hold, it felt like medicine. The deck was mostly empty. A few sailors worked on equipment. Another guard smoked by the rail. Paying her little attention, Greta walked to the opposite side of the ship and gripped the cold metal railing. The ocean stretched in every direction, dark and endless. She had grown up in Bavaria, where there were only small rivers and lakes. She had never seen anything like this. The Atlantic made her feel tiny, meaningless, a speck on a speck floating across an endless void. The sun began to set, painting the clouds orange and purple. For a moment she forgot she was a prisoner. For a moment there was only the sky and the water and the wind on her face. Then the wave came. It rose from nowhere, a rogue swell much larger than the others. The ship tilted sharply to the left. Greta's feet slipped on the wet metal. She grabbed for the rail with her free hand, but her fingers caught only air. Time slowed down. She felt herself falling. The rail slid past her chest, her waist, her knees. She saw the dark water rushing up to meet her. Someone shouted behind her. Then the cold hit. The Atlantic Ocean in October averages 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to steal your breath. Cold enough to kill in 15 minutes. Greta went under immediately. Her heavy uniform dragged her down like an anchor. For a terrible moment, she could not tell which way was up. Her lungs burned. She kicked and thrashed against water that felt thick as oil. Her head broke the surface. She gasped, sucking in air and spray at the same time. "Help!" she screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. The ship was already moving past her, its massive hull sliding away. She went under again, her wool skirt tangled around her legs like a trap. She surfaced, coughing and choking. "I can't breathe." The words came out as a sob. Water filled her mouth. Her arms were already growing weak. The cold was seeping into her muscles, turning them to stone. She could see the ship's back end now getting smaller. They are not stopping, she thought. Why would they? I am just a prisoner, just another enemy to deliver. Then came the whistle. Sharp and piercing, cutting through the wind. Movement on the deck, someone pointing, others running. The ship's engines changed sound. The propellers churned backward. They were stopping. For her. A life preserver splashed into the water 10 feet away. She tried to swim toward it, but her arms would not obey. The cold had reached her bones. Her thoughts moved like mud. She went under again, deeper this time. The water was quieter below the surface, peaceful almost. It would be easy to stop fighting, to let go, to sink into that silence. But something grabbed her jacket, yanked her upward with sudden force. She broke the surface, retching and coughing. Arms wrapped around her from behind, holding her head above water. A voice spoke close to her ear. English words she did not understand, but the tone was calm, steady, almost gentle. An American soldier had jumped into the freezing Atlantic to save her. She could hear him breathing hard. The water was just as cold for him. He was risking death to keep her alive. Later, survivors of cold water immersion would report that rescuers often had only minutes before their own muscles failed. This man knew the danger. He jumped anyway. "Got her!" he shouted to the ship above. Ropes fell. Other soldiers climbed down. Hands lifted Greta from the water. Everything blurred. Movement, shouting, the crushing cold that made her whole body shake. They hauled her onto the deck. Someone wrapped a blanket around her. Someone else checked her pulse, tilted her head back. Through it all, one thought repeated in her frozen mind. They saved me. The enemy jumped into freezing water and saved me. Nothing made sense anymore, but everything was about to change even more. They carried Greta to the medical bay instead of returning her to the cargo hold. The room was small but clean. White walls, the sharp smell of antiseptic. They laid her on a cot and removed her wet clothes with professional care, covering her with warm, dry blankets as each piece came off. Someone pressed a metal cup of hot tea into her shaking hands. The liquid was sweet and scalding. It hurt going down. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. The medic stayed with her all night, checking her breathing, monitoring her temperature. He was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He smiled at her, not with mockery, but with genuine concern. He patted her shoulder and spoke English words she did not understand, but the meaning was clear. You are going to be okay. 6 days later, the ship reached New York Harbor. The women were brought on deck to see the approach. The sight left them speechless. The skyline rose before them, untouched by bombs, shining in the morning sun. Buildings taller than anything they had ever imagined stretched toward the clouds. The Statue of Liberty passed on their right, green and massive, holding her torch high. This was not a defeated nation. This was not a country struggling to survive. This was something else entirely. Buses took them to trains. Trains took them south. 2 days of travel through a country that seemed impossibly rich. The roads were smooth and paved. Houses stood whole and neat with green lawns and cars in driveways. Children played in yards. Women pushed baby carriages. Everything was so normal, so untouched by war. Greta thought of her hometown in Bavaria, the rubble, the ruins, the hollow-eyed survivors picking through debris. The contrast made her stomach hurt. Camp Livingston in Louisiana was their final destination. It looked like a small city. Rows of wooden barracks stretched into the distance. Guard towers stood at the corners, but they seemed almost decorative. There was order here, organization, but not the crushing atmosphere Greta had feared. The processing was efficient. Names, numbers, assignments to barracks. Then came the showers. Greta had dreaded this moment. She had heard whispered fears of humiliation and degradation, but the shower building was clean and private. Individual stalls, hot water that actually ran hot. They were given soap, real soap that smelled like flowers, and towels that were soft and fresh. After showers came clean clothes, simple grey dresses that fit reasonably well. Clean underwear, stockings without holes. Greta touched the fabric in disbelief. These were not rags. These were decent clothes. The final shock came at dinner. They were led to a mess hall, a long wooden building with rows of tables and benches. The smell hit them first. Bread baking, meat cooking, coffee brewing, real food smells. Not the thin soup and sawdust bread they had known for years. The line moved forward. American soldiers in white aprons stood behind a counter, serving food with practiced efficiency. Greta watched in disbelief as her tray was loaded. Mashed potatoes, white and buttery, green beans, actually green, slices of real meat, thick and covered with gravy, a soft, warm roll, a cup of milk, a piece of pie. According to camp records, German POWs at American facilities received approximately 3,300 calories per day, the same ration as American soldiers. In Germany at that same time, civilians survived on less than 1,000 calories daily. Greta carried her tray to a table and sat down. Around her, other women were equally stunned. Some began eating immediately, tears running down their faces. Others hesitated, suspicion fighting with hunger. Hannah sat across from Greta, her eyes wide. "Is this real?" the girl whispered. Greta picked up her fork and took a bite of potato. It was hot, creamy, perfectly salted. She closed her eyes as tears leaked from the corners. "It's real," she said quietly. "God help us. It's real." One prisoner, a woman named Ingrid from Dresden, later wrote to her sister, "We eat better as prisoners than we ever ate as free citizens. The Americans give us meat, butter, coffee. I cannot explain it. I cannot understand it. I cry every night because my stomach is full and yours is empty." That first meal was eaten in near silence. Only the sounds of chewing and occasional sobs broke the quiet. Guards walked slowly up and down the aisles, watching but not threatening. One paused near Greta's table and spoke to a translator. "He says to take your time," the translator reported. "There is plenty more if you want seconds." Seconds. The word seemed absurd. In Germany, there were no seconds. There was barely firsts. Days became weeks. The routine of camp life settled into place with surprising ease. Wake at 6 in the morning, wash in clean facilities, eat breakfast, eggs, bread, real coffee. Then came work assignments, kitchen duty, laundry, grounds maintenance, work in nearby fields, harvesting crops. The hours were long but not brutal, and they were paid for their labor in camp money that could be spent at the canteen. The canteen sold chocolate bars, cigarettes, soap, pencils, writing paper, even lipstick and rouge. The prices were low. Greta bought a Hershey's chocolate bar wrapped in brown paper. She held it in her hands for a long time before unwrapping it. The sweetness exploded on her tongue, almost painful in its intensity. But even as she savored each bite, something dark was growing inside her chest. Guilt, heavy and cold. What right did she have to chocolate when children in Germany were starving? This question was about to become much harder to ignore, because letters from home were coming, and they would carry words that turned every meal into torture. The letters arrived in December, just before Christmas. Dozens of them, delivered all at once, after being delayed somewhere in the military postal system. Greta received 3 letters from her mother, written over 3 months. She read them in order, her hands shaking, watching her mother's desperation grow with each page. The first letter described the cold, the lack of fuel, the constant hunger. Her mother's handwriting was shaky, but controlled. The second letter described her father falling ill, too weak to work. The words were shorter, more desperate. "We eat potato peels boiled in water when we are lucky," her mother wrote. "Most days we are not lucky." The third letter was barely legible. The handwriting wandered across the page, like a drunk man walking. "We are dying here slowly," her mother wrote. "I dream of food every night. I dream of warmth. I dream that you are here and can help us. But you are so far away and we have nothing. Please come home if you can, please." Greta finished the letter and simply sat there, the paper crumpled in her grip. Around her, other women were crying, clutching their own letters. The barracks filled with the sound of grief, raw and terrible. That night, Greta could not eat dinner. She sat in the mess hall staring at her tray. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, carrots, bread with butter, a cup of milk, a piece of cake. Her stomach twisted with nausea. How could she eat this when her mother was dying of hunger? Hannah found her later, sitting alone in the dark barracks. The younger woman sat beside her in silence. After a long time, Greta finally spoke. "I hate them," she whispered. "I hate the Americans for being so rich, for having so much while we have nothing, for feeding us better than our own country ever did. I hate them for making me see them as human. It was easier when they were just the enemy." "Do you really hate them?" Hannah asked gently. "Or do you hate that they have shown you the truth?" Greta closed her eyes. Tears leaked from the corners. "Maybe both. I don't know anymore. My mother is starving, and I am eating chocolate. How is that right?" The guilt spread through the camp like a disease. Some women stopped eating, unable to swallow food when their families starved. Others ate compulsively, as if trying to store calories against a future return to hunger. Most simply carried the weight of it, the impossible burden of being well-fed prisoners while their homelands died. One woman from Munich named Anna wrote in her diary, "Every bite feels like a betrayal. Every full stomach is a crime against my family. The Americans treat us with dignity while my people live like rats in rubble. I cannot reconcile these truths. They sit in my mind like broken glass." The Americans seemed unaware of this internal torment. The guards continued their duties with professional detachment. Some were friendlier than others. There was a young corporal from Texas who always smiled and said good morning. There was an older sergeant who reminded Greta of her father with patient eyes and a quiet manner. One afternoon, during a break from field work, the sergeant offered Greta a cigarette. She accepted, and he lit it for her with a silver lighter. They stood together in silence for a moment, smoking and watching clouds move across the Louisiana sky. "You okay?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. "You seem sad." Greta nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Letters from home?" he guessed. His voice was gentle. She nodded again. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "War is hell for everybody, but it's over now. Things will get better. They always do." His kindness made it worse. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him, but he was just a tired man trying to offer comfort. Just another human being caught in the wreckage of history. That night, Greta lay awake, staring at the darkness. Her body was warm and fed. Her mother was freezing and starving. The injustice crushed her chest like a physical weight. She was a prisoner, a defeated enemy, and yet she lived better than her own family. The paradox had no answer, but it was about to get even more complicated, because the Americans were about to show the prisoners something that would shatter not just their comfort, but their entire understanding of the war they had served. In February 1946, the Americans gathered all the prisoners in the mess hall after dinner. The tables had been pushed aside. Rows of wooden chairs faced a white sheet hung on the wall. A film projector sat in the back of the room, already threaded and ready. The women filed in, confused and curious. The Americans had shown propaganda films before, movies about democracy, about the Geneva Convention, about why the Allies had fought. Most of the women watched with skepticism or boredom, but tonight felt different. The guards' faces were serious, grim even. No one smiled, no one made small talk. "Please sit," the camp commander said through a translator. "What you are about to see is difficult, but it is necessary. It is the truth." The lights went out. The projector hummed to life. White numbers counted down on the sheet. Then the images began. The film showed the liberation of concentration camps, Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald, names that would echo through history like curses. The images were beyond horror. Bodies stacked like firewood, mass graves filled with skeletal corpses, survivors who looked more dead than alive, their skin stretched over bones, their eyes empty and haunted, mountains of shoes, piles of eyeglasses, human hair collected in massive heaps, ovens, gas chambers, ditches filled with the murdered. The mess hall was absolutely silent except for the projector's whir, and the narrator's calm, terrible voice explaining what they were seeing. American and British soldiers had filmed everything when they opened the camps. They had documented the evidence, counted the dead, interviewed survivors. The footage was clinical, factual, undeniable. According to the narrator, the Nazis had murdered approximately 6 million Jews, along with millions of others: Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, homosexuals, Soviets. The camps had been factories of death, operating with industrial efficiency, while ordinary Germans claimed they did not know. Greta watched, her hands gripping the edge of her chair, until her knuckles turned white. Her stomach churned. She had heard rumors during the war, whispers about camps, about what happened to Jews and others the Reich deemed undesirable, but she had not believed it, had not wanted to believe it. She had told herself it was enemy propaganda, lies meant to make Germany look evil. Now the truth was projected on a screen in grainy black and white. Undeniable, damning. A woman next to Greta began to sob. Another got up and ran from the hall, unable to bear it. Some sat stone-faced in shock, their minds unable to process what their eyes were seeing. Hannah sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her young face. The film lasted 45 minutes. It felt like hours. When it finally ended and the lights came back on, no one moved, no one spoke. They sat in horrified silence, each woman processing what she had seen, what it meant for everything they had believed in. Greta's mind raced. This was done in our name, she thought. By our government, our military, our country. We served that machine. We operated radios, typed orders, kept the system running. We didn't know, but we should have known. We didn't want to know. That was our crime. The camp commander stood at the front of the room. His face was hard, angry even, but his voice was controlled when he spoke. You served a regime that did this, the translator conveyed his words. You may not have killed anyone with your own hands, but you were part of the system. We want you to see what that system created. We want you to understand what you supported. He paused, letting his words sink in. But here is what I also want you to understand. We are not showing you this to punish you. We are showing you this so you will go home and tell the truth. Germany needs to face what it did, and you need to carry that truth back with you. The women filed out of the mess hall in silence. No one could speak. No one could meet each other's eyes. They walked back to their barracks like ghosts, each carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. That night, the barracks was subdued. Women lay in their bunks wrestling with impossible questions. How many had died while they filed paperwork? How many had burned while they laughed at parties? How many children had starved while they ate and slept and lived ordinary lives, pretending not to notice? Some tried to rationalize it. We were just secretaries, just clerks, just radio operators. We didn't do that. But the rationalization rang hollow. They had been part of it, willing or not, knowing or not. And here was the unbearable paradox. The Americans who had shown them that film, who had forced them to confront that truth, those same Americans had saved Greta from drowning, had fed them, clothed them, treated them with dignity. The enemy, showing more humanity than their own nation, had shown to millions. Hannah whispered from the bunk below, "How do we live with this? How do we go home, knowing what we know?" Greta had no answer, only the crushing weight of truth and the strange, terrible grace of enemies who had chosen mercy when they could have chosen revenge. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. Spring came to Louisiana in March with an explosion of warmth and green. The camp organized work details on local farms, and Greta found herself picking strawberries alongside other prisoners under the watchful eyes of guards who no longer seemed like enemies. The work was hard, but satisfying. There was something healing about putting hands in soil, about growing things instead of destroying them. One afternoon during a water break, the Texas corporal approached with a camera. "Mind if I take a picture?" he asked, through a translator. Some women turned away, but Greta and Hannah nodded. The camera clicked, capturing them with dirt-smudged faces and tired smiles. They looked oddly content despite being prisoners of war. "For your families," he explained, "to show them you are okay." The gesture was small but meaningful. He was not required to do that. He just thought it would be kind. These Americans, with their casual decency, had destroyed Greta's worldview more completely than any bomb ever could. In April, word came that repatriation would begin soon. Prisoners would be sent home in waves over the coming months. The news brought complicated emotions, relief, dread, fear of what they would find in the ruins. Greta's group was scheduled for June. On her last Sunday at camp, she attended church service. The chaplain blessed those departing, speaking about carrying hope into darkness, about being witnesses to mercy, about never forgetting that enemies could choose humanity over hate. The day before departure, Sergeant Miller sought her out. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For your journey," he said. Inside were chocolate bars, cigarettes, soap, and a note written in careful English. "Remember that kindness is stronger than hate. Take care. Sergeant Miller." Greta clutched the package to her chest, unable to speak. This man owed her nothing. He could have treated her with contempt. Instead, he showed her respect and care. She would never forget him. The journey back across the Atlantic was nothing like the first crossing. The ship was newer, the weather was better, and the women aboard were different too, healthier, stronger, but also more complicated. They had left Germany as believers. They returned as questioners. Greta stood at the rail as they approached Hamburg. The harbour was still partly destroyed. Cranes and construction everywhere. The skyline was nothing like New York's untouched grandeur. This was a wounded place, scarred and struggling. "What will you tell them?" Hannah asked beside her. "Your family, your friends. What will you tell them about America?" Greta thought for a long moment. "The truth," she finally said, "that I fell into the ocean and they saved me, that they fed us when they could have starved us, that they treated us like humans when they could have treated us like animals, that they showed us what we could have been but chose not to be." The ship docked and they disembarked into a Germany they barely recognized. American and British occupation forces were everywhere, distributing food, maintaining order, keeping Germany alive. The victors were showing more care than the defeated nation's own leaders ever had. Greta made her way to Bavaria by train through a devastated landscape. When she finally reached her hometown, she barely recognized it. Her street was mostly rubble, her house was a shell, but her mother was there, thin and aged beyond her years. When she saw Greta, she simply held her and wept. That night, sitting in the cellar by candlelight, Greta told them everything. About the drowning, the rescue, the food and kindness, the film of the camps. Her father listened in silence. "I knew," he said quietly, when she finished. "Not all of it, but enough. I knew things were terribly wrong, but I was afraid to say it, afraid to even think it. Our cowardice cost millions of lives." He looked at Greta with hollow eyes. "You are right to tell the truth. Someone has to." In the years that followed, Greta became a teacher in the new Germany. She taught English to children who had never known the war. She told them about the time she fell into the ocean and an enemy soldier saved her life. She told them about chocolate and kindness. She told them about the camps too, about the price of hatred and the cost of silence. She was relentless in her truth-telling. She owed it to Sergeant Miller, to all the Americans who had shown her another way. Kindness had done what bullets could not. It had changed minds, opened hearts, and planted seeds that grew into a better Germany. Decades later, when Greta was an old woman and Germany was whole again, prosperous and democratic, she would still think about those months in Camp Livingston. She kept Sergeant Miller's note in a drawer, the paper yellowed and fragile. Her grandchildren would ask about the war sometimes. She would tell them about the cold, dark water, about giving up, and then about the arms that grabbed her and pulled her up when they did not have to. "That is what I want you to remember," she would tell them. "Not the war, not the hatred, but that moment when the enemy chose humanity. That is what we must always choose no matter what. Humanity over hate. Always." The story of a German woman who could not breathe, who begged for help in a foreign language, who was saved by an enemy soldier. It became proof that even in the darkest times humanity could break through. That kindness was not weakness, but the greatest strength. That the simple act of saving a life could change the world more completely than any weapon ever could.